A man slapped a woman in the middle of a crowded cafe. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. Everyone froze. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Coffee cups hung in the air. Some people pulled out their phones. Others looked away, pretending they didn't see it. He stood over her, his face twisted with rage, yelling, "Know your place." She sat there, stunned, her hand slowly rising to her burning cheek. The red mark was already forming. But what he didn't know was that her husband had just walked through the door. And that husband, Keanu Reeves. What happened in the next 10 minutes became the most talked about moment in that entire city. This isn't just a story about a celebrity stepping in. This is about what happens when a bully picks the wrong target, on the wrong day, in front of the wrong person. It's about the moment arrogance meets consequences. And trust me, you won't believe how this ends. Before we dive in, do me a favor, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to see how far this message reaches. New York,
London, Mumbai, Tokyo. Let me know.
And to everyone who's ever stood up for someone who couldn't defend themselves. To everyone who's ever wished they had the courage to speak up when they saw something wrong. This one's for you. Because what you're about to witness isn't just about one man's actions. It's about the power of choosing respect over ego. It's about understanding that true strength doesn't come from raising your voice or your fist. It comes from standing firm when everything inside you wants to explode. Keanu didn't need to throw a punch. He didn't need to shout or threaten. He just needed to be present. And sometimes, that's the most powerful weapon of all. So buckle up. Because this story has twists you won't see coming. Moments that'll make you clench your fists. And a lesson at the end that'll stay with you long after the video ends. Let's begin. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon at the Meridian Cafe, one of those upscale spots in downtown Los Angeles, where people sip overpriced lattes and pretend to work on their laptops. The kind of place where everyone's dressed just a little too nice for a casual coffee run. Where the music is soft jazz, the chairs are velvet, and the Wi-Fi password costs you a $12 cappuccino. At a corner table by the window sat a woman in her early 30s. Simple jeans, white blouse, hair pulled back in a ponytail, no makeup, no jewelry except a small silver wedding band. Her name was Elena. She wasn't famous, didn't want to be. She'd spent years deliberately avoiding the spotlight, even though her husband lived in it. She liked her privacy, her books, her quiet Saturday afternoons alone with her thoughts. Today she was reading a novel, something about the French resistance during World War II. She was completely absorbed, turning pages slowly, occasionally sipping her tea, minding her own business. A few tables away sat Derek Holloway, mid-40s, expensive charcoal suit that screamed, "I'm important," a Rolex on his wrist that caught the light every time he gestured. Slick back hair, sharp jaw, cold eyes. He was on a business call, and he wasn't just talking, he was performing. "I don't care what the contract says. Brian, make it happen or you're fired. Do I need to fly out there myself?" His voice boomed across the cafe. People glanced over, irritated. A couple near the counter exchanged looks, but no one said anything. That's how Derek liked it. He'd built his entire career on intimidation, in boardrooms, in restaurants, at the gym. Everywhere he went, he made sure people knew he was in charge. He hung up the phone with a dramatic sigh, tossed it on the table, and leaned back in his chair like a king surveying his kingdom. His eyes scanned the room slowly, looking for something. Validation. A reaction. And then his gaze landed on Elena. She was sitting alone, calm, completely unbothered by his theatrics. And for some reason, that irritated him. Maybe it was the fact that she hadn't even glanced his way during his entire loud conversation. Maybe it was because she looked content, and he hated seeing people content when he felt empty. Or maybe he was just the kind of man who couldn't stand being ignored. Whatever the reason, he stood up, grabbed his coffee, and walked over to her table. "Excuse me, sweetheart, is this seat taken?" Elena looked up briefly from her book. Her expression was polite but distant. "Actually, yes. I'm waiting for someone." Derek smirked and sat down anyway, spreading his arms across the back of the chair. "Don't see anyone here." Elena's jaw tightened slightly, but she kept her voice calm. "He'll be here soon?" "Sure he will." Derek leaned forward, invading her space. "You know, it's rude to ignore someone when they're trying to be friendly." "I'm not ignoring you. I'm reading. Maybe you should be more social. A woman sitting alone like this in a place like this, people might get the wrong idea." Elena slowly closed her book, marking her page with a napkin. Her voice stayed calm, but there was steel underneath. I think you should go back to your table. Derek's smile faded. His eyes narrowed. You think you're better than me? Elena didn't answer. She just gathered her things, her book, her phone, her tea, and started to stand. I'm leaving. And that's when Derek's mask came off completely. His hand shot out, and he grabbed her wrist. Hard. I wasn't done talking. The entire cafe went silent. Keyboards stopped clicking. Conversations died. Every eye in the room turned toward them. Elena looked down at his hand on her wrist, then back up at his face. Her voice was low. Steady. Let go of me. Derek squeezed harder, his knuckles going white.
Or what?
You'll call your boyfriend.
Your daddy. Let go.
But he didn't. Instead, he shoved her back down into the chair. Her book hit the floor with a thud, and the room held its breath. Before we continue, pause right here and tell me in the comments, have you ever witnessed something like this in public? Helena sat frozen in the chair, her wrist still aching from where he'd grabbed her. Her book lay on the floor, pages bent. Derek stood over her like a predator cornering prey. Some people in the cafe gasped quietly. Others reached for their phones, but no one moved, no one stood up, no one said a word. Derek noticed the phones coming out, and it only fed his ego. He wanted an audience. Woman like you, he said, his voice dripping with venom. Need to learn respect. Elena's hands were trembling, not from fear but from the rage she was forcing herself to contain. She'd been taught her whole life to stay calm, to de-escalate, to avoid making scenes. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. Don't give them a reaction. That's what they want. But this man had just put his hands on her, in public, in front of dozens of witnesses. And he was still talking. You think you're special. Derek continued, leaning down so his face was inches from hers. You think because you dress simple and read your little books that you're above everyone else. His breath smelled like coffee and arrogance. You're nothing. Just another woman who doesn't know her place. Elena's chest rose and fell slowly as she controlled her breathing. She looked him directly in the eyes. You have 3 seconds to walk away. Her voice was quiet. Steady. Derek blinked, caught off guard for just a moment. Then he laughed. A cruel, mocking laugh that echoed through the silent cafe. Or what? He sneered. What are you going to do? Elena didn't answer. She just stared at him, her jaw set, her eyes unflinching. And that silence, that refusal to cower, made Derek angrier. Because deep down, bullies can't stand it when their targets don't break. You need to be taught a lesson, he hissed, and then he raised his hand. Time seemed to slow. A woman near the counter whispered, Oh my God, he's not. But he was. Derek's hand came down fast and hard. The slap cracked through the air like a whip. Elena's head snapped to the side. Her hair fell across her face. A bright red handprint bloomed instantly on her cheek. For a moment, the entire world stopped. No one breathed. No one moved. Even Derek seemed stunned by what he'd just done, but only for a second. Then his mask of arrogance slid back into place. He straightened his jacket, smoothing down the lapels like he'd just finished a business deal. That's what happens, he said loudly, making sure everyone heard. When you disrespect me. He looked around the room, daring anyone to challenge him. No one did. Satisfied, he turned on his heel and started walking back toward his table. His shoes clicked against the tile floor. Click, click, confident, untouchable. He'd gotten away with it. Or so he thought. Because he only made it 2 steps. That's when the door to the cafe opened. The little bell above it chimed softly. And standing in the doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun, carrying 2 to-go coffee cups, was a man in a black motorcycle jacket and worn jeans. Tall, calm, quiet presence, Keanu Reeves. He stepped inside and his eyes immediately found Elena. He saw the red mark blazing on her cheek. He saw her hand trembling as she touched her face. He saw the tears she was fighting to hold back. And then his gaze shifted. To Derek, who was still walking away, adjusting his cufflinks like nothing had happened. To the crowd of people standing frozen with their phones out. To the staff behind the counter, paralyzed with shock. Keanu's expression didn't change. He didn't shout, didn't run, but his eyes went ice cold. He set the coffee cups down gently on the nearest table, never breaking eye contact with Derek's back, and then he started walking, slowly, deliberately. Each footstep echoed through the silent cafe, step, step, step. Derek still didn't notice. He was too busy smirking to himself, probably already planning how he'd tell this story to his business buddies later. You should have seen her face, he'd say. She learned real quick. But he never got the chance, because Keanu's hand landed on his shoulder, firm, steady. Derek froze. He turned around annoyed, ready to snap at whoever dared touch him. "What do you?" The words died in his throat. His face went from red to white in an instant. Because he was staring directly into the face of Keanu Reeves. And Keanu's voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet as a grave. "You just hit my wife." Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. No sound came out. His brain was short, circuiting, trying to process what was happening. The confident smirk that had been plastered on his face 30 seconds ago was completely gone, replaced by pure, unfiltered panic. "Wait, you're Keanu Reeves." His voice cracked on the name. Keanu didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, perfectly still, his dark eyes locked on Derek like a laser. The entire cafe held its breath, phones were up, recording. Every angle covered. This was about to go viral, and everyone knew it. "You just hit my wife." Keanu repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. But somehow, that whisper carried more weight than any shout ever could. Derek's eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit, an excuse, anything. I didn't know. That's the problem." Keanu stepped closer, not aggressive, not threatening. But the air around him seemed to shift. "You didn't need to know who she was." He continued, his tone still devastatingly calm. "You didn't need to know who I was." Another step. "You just needed to be a decent human being." Derek stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a chair. "Look, man." She was rude, okay? "I was just trying to have a conversation and she told you to leave." Keanu's voice cut through the excuse like a blade. "And you grabbed her. You shoved her. You hit her." "I didn't mean." "You meant every second of it." The room was so silent you could hear the espresso machine hissing in the background. Derek tried to salvage his pride, his ego desperately clawing for control. "You don't understand. Women these days, they think they can just stop talking." 2 words. But the way Keanu said them made Derek's mouth snap shut instantly. Keanu glanced over at Alina. She was still sitting at the table, her hand pressed against her cheek, watching quietly. Their eyes met. She gave him a small nod. "I'm okay." That nod was important, because it told him she didn't need him to be her savior. She needed him to be her partner. To stand with her, not over her. Keanu turned back to Derek. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice still terrifyingly calm. "You're going to apologize to her. Publicly. Right now." Derek's face flushed bright red. His fists clenched at his sides. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to refuse, to fight back, to save face. But he looked around the room, 40 pairs of eyes staring at him. Dozens of phones pointed his direction. He was trapped, and he knew it. He swallowed hard, his throat bobbing visibly. Then he turned slowly toward Elena. I'm sorry," he muttered, barely audible. Keanu didn't move. "Louder." Derek's jaw clenched so tight it looked like his teeth might crack. "I said I'm sorry." His voice echoed through the cafe, shrill and desperate. Elena rose slowly from her chair. She picked up her book from the floor, dusted it off, and walked toward him. Every step measured, controlled. She stopped directly in front of Derek, looking him straight in the eye. "You're not sorry?" she said quietly. "You're scared. There's a difference." Derek opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out, because she was right. And everyone in that room knew it. Elena turned away from him, took Keanu's hand and started walking toward the door. Derek exhaled shakily, his shoulders sagging with relief. It was over, he could leave. Disappear. Pretend this never happened. But as Keanu and Elena reached the door, Keanu stopped. He didn't turn around. He just spoke over his shoulder, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Be the way I've already called the police." Derek's blood ran cold. "What?" "They'll be here in about 3 minutes. Now Keanu turned, his expression unreadable. Assault. Battery, witnessed by 40 people. Recorded by at least a dozen phones. Derek's face went from white to gray.
"You can't. I said I was sorry."
"You apologized because you got caught," Keanu said simply. "Not because you felt remorse." He gestured around the room. "Every person in here watched you hurt her. And you didn't care. You felt powerful." Keanu's eyes hardened. "Now you get to explain that to a judge." Derek's knees buckled slightly. He grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. "Please, please. I'll do anything. I'll pay her. She doesn't want your money." Elena's voice was soft but firm. "I want you to never do this to anyone else ever again." And then they walked out. The door closed behind them with a soft chime, leaving Derek standing alone in the center of the cafe, surrounded by strangers. All of them staring, all of them judging. And in the distance, growing louder with each passing second, sirens. Derek stood frozen in the middle of the cafe, his face drained of all color. The sirens were getting closer, louder. His hands started trembling. This can't be happening, he muttered to himself. Over some nobody. Some random woman. A barista behind the counter whispered to her coworker. He still doesn't get it. The door burst open. 2 police officers walked in, a tall male officer and a shorter female officer, both with serious expressions. Derek Holloway. Derek spun around, his eyes wild. Yes, but listen, this is all a misunderstanding. I barely touched her. She's exaggerating. You know how women? Sir, we need you to come with us. The female officer interrupted firmly.
You don't understand.
Do you know who I am? I'm a senior partner at Holloway and Associates. I have lawyers. Good lawyers. Then you should call them. The male officer said calmly, pulling out handcuffs. You're under arrest for assault and battery. This is insane. Derek's voice cracked, climbing higher.
She's married to a celebrity. They're just doing this for publicity.
But as the officer moved to cuff him, the cafe door opened again. Keanu and Elena walked back in. The room went completely silent. Derek's eyes widened. What are you doing back here? Come to gloat. Keanu didn't answer him. Instead, he walked past Derek entirely and approached the cafe manager, Marcus, who'd been standing frozen behind the counter this whole time. Marcus, right? Keanu's tone was even. Calm, the manager nodded nervously.
Why, yes, sir.
Mr. Reeves, this man's been coming here for months, hasn't he? Marcus hesitated, his eyes darting between Keanu and Derek. Answer honestly. Keanu said gently. It's important. Marcus swallowed hard.
Yes, he's a regular.
And how many complaints have you received about him? Harassment, yelling at staff, intimidating other customers. The manager's face flushed red. He didn't answer. But a young barista in the back, barely 20, with purple streaks in her hair, spoke up. Her voice shook, but she said it anyway. 7. Every head turned toward her. We've had 7 complaints about him in the last 4 months. She continued, her hands gripping the counter. He made one of our servers cry. He threw a coffee cup at another. He's called me names I won't repeat. Her eyes were wet, but her voice grew stronger. But he spends a lot of money. So management told us to just deal with it. The cafe went deathly quiet. Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Keanu turned back to him, and his expression was no longer calm, it was disappointed. So you knew, Keanu said quietly. You knew he was doing this, and you let it continue. We didn't think he'd ever actually. Marcus trailed off, unable to finish. You enabled him, Elena said, stepping forward. Every time you looked the other way, you told him his behavior was acceptable. She looked around at the other customers, the ones still holding their phones, the ones who'd watched it all happen, and every single one of you saw what he did. You recorded it. But not one of you stepped in. The guilt in the room was palpable. A woman in a business suit near the window looked down at her shoes. A college student in the corner closed his laptop slowly. I'm not saying that to shame you. Elena continued, her voice softer now. I understand. It's scary, you don't want to get involved. You don't want to be the one who makes it worse. She paused. But that's how people like him win. Because we stay silent. Keanu turned to Derek, who was now in handcuffs, his face a mixture of rage and humiliation. You thought you were untouchable, Keanu said. You thought money and confidence meant you could do whatever you wanted. Derek's jaw clenched. You think you're some kind of hero. You're just an actor. You don't know what it's like in the real world. The real world, Elena interrupted, is full of men exactly like you. She stepped closer, looking him directly in the eye. Men who mistake cruelty for strength, who think respect is something you take instead of earn. Derek's face twisted. You don't know anything about me. I know enough, Elena said. I know you hit a stranger in public because she wouldn't give you attention. She paused. And I know that after today, everyone you work with, everyone you know, will see exactly who you are. Derek's face went pale as the reality sank in. The videos, the witnesses, the arrest. His reputation was over. As the officers led him toward the door, he looked back one last time. You ruined my life. Keanu's response was ice, cold. No, you did that yourself. Drop a comment, jest I if you think he deserved this. Or merci Y if you think Keanu went too far. Let's see where you stand. The door closed behind Derek and the officers. The sound of the police car pulling away faded into the distance. For a long moment, nobody in the cafe moved. Then, slowly, The tension began to dissolve. People started putting their phones down. Conversations resumed in hushed whispers. But the energy had changed. Something had shifted in that room, something deeper than just witnessing an arrest. Keanu turned back to Marcus, the manager, who still looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. "What's your full name?" Keanu asked. "Marcus Chen," he replied quietly. "I'm the general manager here. Do you own this place?" "No, sir. I manage it for the owner." Keanu nodded slowly. "Then here's what you're going to do, Marcus." He gestured around the cafe. "You're going to put up a sign. Right by the entrance. Big enough that no one can miss it." Marcus grabbed a napkin and a pen, his hands shaking slightly. "What should it say? We have zero tolerance for harassment, abuse, or intimidation of any kind. Anyone who violates this policy will be immediately removed and reported to authorities." Marcus scribbled frantically. "And," Keanu continued, "you're going to implement mandatory training for all your staff. How to recognize harassment, how to intervene safely, who to call, what to document."
Yes.
"Absolutely. Today, not today," Elena said firmly. "Tomorrow, first thing, and you're going to personally apologize to every staff member who filed a complaint about Derek." Marcus's eyes widened. "Ah, yes, of course. I should have done that months ago." "You should have," Keanu agreed. "But you can start now." The young barista with purple streaks in her hair, the one who'd spoken up, stepped forward hesitantly. "Mr. Reeves." "Miss." "Just Elena," Elena said with a gentle smile. "I just wanted to say thank you. I've wanted to stand up to him so many times, but I was afraid I'd lose my job." Keanu looked at Marcus pointedly. "She won't, will she?" "No," Marcus said quickly. "Absolutely not. In fact," he turned to the barista. "Sarah, right?" She nodded. "You're getting a raise. And I want you to help me develop the new training program. You clearly understand what needs to change here." Sarah's eyes went wide. "Really? Really?" For the first time since the whole incident began, someone smiled. Keanu turned to address the entire cafe. People were still watching, still listening. "I'm not a hero," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "I didn't do anything special. I just did what anyone should do when they see someone being hurt." He paused, letting that sink in. "But a lot of you watched it happen. You pulled out your phones, you recorded, and that's actually not a bad thing. A few confused glances. Documentation matters," Keanu explained. "Evidence matters. If you hadn't recorded." This would have been his word against hers. He looked around at the faces staring back at him, but the next step after recording is action. Call for help. Alert staff. Don't just watch. Don't just post it later for views. A businessman near the back spoke up, his voice thick with guilt. "I wanted to help. I didn't know what to do." "That's fair," Elena said. "Not everyone can physically intervene. But you can call 911. You can go get help. You can stand up and say this isn't okay." She touched her cheek where the mark was already starting to fade. Even just acknowledging what happened can make a difference. It tells the victim they're not crazy, that what happened was real and wrong. Keanu took Elena's hand. "We're going to go now. But before we do, if anyone here has ever experienced something like this, or knows someone who has," he pulled out a few business cards from his jacket pocket and set them on the nearest table. "These are resources, hotlines, support groups, legal aid organizations. Take one if you need it. Take several and give them to others." As they turned to leave, footsteps rushed toward them. A young woman in her 20s, tears streaming down her face, approached. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Thank you." Her hands were shaking. "My ex-boyfriend used to do things like that, in restaurants, in parking lots, and no one ever stopped him. Everyone just looked away." Elena's expression softened completely. She pulled the woman into a hug without hesitation. "You deserved better," Elena whispered. "You always deserved better." The woman sobbed quietly into Elena's shoulder. "It wasn't your fault," Elena continued. "And it's not your responsibility to fix him. You just focus on healing yourself." When they finally pulled apart, Keanu handed her one of the resource cards. "You're not alone," he said simply. The woman clutched the card like it was a lifeline. She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Thank you. Both of you." Keanu and Elena walked toward the door. No cameras flashing, no dramatic exit, just two people who'd refused to let cruelty go unanswered. As they stepped outside into the afternoon sun, Elena leaned her head against Keanu's shoulder. "You think it'll actually change anything?" she asked quietly. Keanu looked back through the cafe window. Inside, Sarah the barista was talking animatedly with Marcus. The young woman who'd been crying was being comforted by two other customers. People were actually talking to each other, instead of staring at screens. Maybe not everything, Keanu said, but something. And sometimes that's enough. They walked down the street together, hand in hand. Just another couple on a Saturday afternoon, except they'd just reminded an entire room full of people what it meant to choose courage over comfort. 3 weeks later, a video appeared online. It wasn't the shaky phone footage from the cafe, though that had already gone viral, racking up over 50 million views. This was different. It was a professionally shot interview. Sarah, the barista with purple streaks in her hair, sat across from a local news anchor. "So tell us," the anchor said, "what's changed at the Meridian Cafe since that day?" Sarah smiled, a real, genuine smile. "Everything," she said. "We have mandatory de-escalation training now. There's a panic button behind every counter. And Marcus actually listens when we report problems. And the sign?" The camera cut to a shot of the cafe entrance. There it was, a large, professionally made sign right by the door. "Zr tolerancy for resemblance abus everon deserves restino exceptios." It's not just a sign, Sarah continued. It's a promise. And we're keeping it. The anchor leaned forward. "Have you had to enforce it?" "Twice. Both times, the person was asked to leave immediately. One of them tried to argue, said he was a good customer. Marcus didn't hesitate. He said, "Not anymore." Sarah's eyes got a little misty. "I've worked in food service for 6 years. This is the first place I've ever felt protected." The interview cut to Marcus next. "I failed my staff," he said bluntly. "I prioritized profit over people. I told myself I was just keeping the peace. But really I was enabling abuse." He looked directly into the camera. "If you're a manager, a business owner, anyone in a position of authority, don't make my mistake. Don't wait for a celebrity to walk in and force you to do the right thing. Just do it." The anchor asked one final question. "Have you heard from Mr. Marcus, my wife, since that day?" "Elena came back last week. Sat in the same spot. Read her book, ordered tea. Did anything happen?" "No," Marcus said. "And that's exactly the point. She should be able to sit and read in peace. Everyone should." The video ended and the screen faded to black. But the story didn't end there. Because across the country, in coffee shops and restaurants and retail stores, other managers started putting up similar signs. "We stand with our staff. Kindness is required here. Harassment will not be tolerated." It became a movement, not because a celebrity told people to do it, but because one moment of courage reminded everyone what they'd forgotten. That silence enables cruelty. That standing up doesn't always mean throwing punches. Sometimes it just means saying, "This isn't okay," and refusing to look away. Derek Holloway's story took a different turn. He lost his job within 48 hours of the video going viral. The law firm released a statement. "Mr. Holloway's behavior does not reflect our values. His employment has been terminated effective immediately. He was convicted of misdemeanor assault, sentenced to community service, anger management classes, and probation." But the real punishment was something the court couldn't impose. Everywhere he went, people recognized him. That's the guy who hit that woman. The one Keanu Reeves got arrested. His reputation, the thing he'd valued most, was destroyed. Some people said it was too harsh. Others said it was justice. But Elena had a different perspective. In a rare interview weeks later, she was asked, "Do you think Derek learned his lesson?" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I don't know if he learned it. But I hope he did. I hope he looks in the mirror and realizes that strength isn't about control. It's about restraint." "Do you forgive him?" Elena smiled sadly. "Forgiveness isn't about him. It's about me choosing not to carry his anger. So yes, I forgive him. But that doesn't mean there shouldn't be consequences." The interviewer pressed. "What would you say to other women who've experienced something similar?" Elena's expression grew serious. "You are not responsible for someone else's violence. You didn't cause it. You can't fix it. And you don't owe your abuser forgiveness, patience, or silence." She leaned forward. "But you do owe yourself healing, safety, peace. And if the people around you won't protect you, find people who will. They exist, I promise." Keanu never gave an interview about the incident. When reporters asked, he simply said, "I was just being a husband." And when pressed further, he added, "Respect isn't something you show only to the rich or famous. It's something you show to everyone, especially when you think no one's watching. Because the truth is, someone's always watching. Your kids, your colleagues, the stranger across the room, and they're learning from you whether you realize it or not. He paused, his voice quiet but firm. So teach them well. The lesson, respect isn't about who someone is. It's about who you are. Derek thought power came from fear, from control, from making others feel small. But real power, it's quiet. It stands up when no one else will, and it doesn't need applause. Keanu didn't need to throw a punch. He didn't need to yell. He just refused to let violence be normalized. He refused to let cruelty win. And that refusal, that simple act of standing firm, changed everything. Not just for Elena, not just for Sarah and the other staff members, but for every single person in that cafe who watched it happen and realized they had a choice: to look away or to look closer, to stay silent or to speak up, to enable or to protect. If you've ever been in a situation like this as the victim, the witness, or the one who stepped in, know this: you're braver than you think, and you're not alone. The world needs more people who choose courage over comfort, who choose kindness over cruelty, who choose to stand when it's easier to sit. Be that person. Not because it's easy, but because it's right. Type RESPET in the comments if you believe kindness and courage can change the world. And tell me, where are you watching from?